Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Spring Skies Advanced Artistry Workshop. I've got my stone here. We're creating on a 7-inch round surface. On the sample, you'll see I have it painted white, and I used the enchanted glaze over that white just to give it a little fun pop. Today I'm going to create on black. I'm going to make my design, and then when I'm finished, I am going to coat the whole thing in the enchanted shimmer just to give it a different look, just to show you a different version. But we're going to do the same steps. So if you want to get your guide out and have that handy, that may be helpful. Today we are using a stencil, and if you get the boxes, it is in your box. If you are not a box subscriber, there is a PNG image which you can print out, and then you can use carbon paper to trace it. Or if you have a Cricut or a Silhouette or something, cutting machine, you can cut your own stencil and use that as well. So either way, I am going to go ahead and tape my stencil on here just so it doesn't move around on me. And then I'm going to use a sponge. I do typically cut these just so that I'm not wasting the whole sponge, but this one has already been cut. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to stencil on the background layer, which is Coral Blush, which is the darker of the two corals that we have. I'm going to move this down just a smidge. There we go. Okie dokie. All right, so anytime I stencil, I don't want to use a ton of paint on this sponge. So I'm going to get some paint on there, and then I'm going to do what they call offloading, which means tap it out onto a paper or paper towel so it's not sopping. You can see it's kind of absorbed in there. And then I'm going to do, because I'm working on black, I definitely am going to need 2 layers. But having a nice thin coat of paint on this sponge keeps it from squishing out underneath that stencil. It keeps the stencil line just a little bit cleaner. If you do any kind of decoupage or art with stencils, mixed media, if you've got a stencil brush, you could also use that if you're comfortable. But we're just going to go ahead and get this background color on there. All right, got that first layer dry, and then I'm just going to go over the top one more time. This will make the color a little more vibrant, because I don't want any of that dark black color showing through. That's the downside of having the black background. But I also think these colors will look really pretty on a black background as well. Oops. Make sure I've got good coverage here before I take off my stencil. Right, there we go. And when my stencil, this is kind of a thin, delicate stencil, so I'm not even going to try to clean off the paint. Sometimes just leaving that paint on there, as long as it's evenly layered, is just going to give you a little more support for your stencil if you choose to reuse it. So I'm not going to wash this off. I'm just going to let it dry. And then I am pretty happy with how this stencil turned out. There are a few areas where it's not perfect, and so if that's the case, you can get some black or whatever your background color is, black paint, and just use a really small thin brush, and you can kind of clean up some of those edges if you need to. I feel like most of mine are pretty good. I did a good job with this stencil. Usually, the more delicate that you are, the less paint you have on that sponge, the better. I don't use stencils a whole lot when I create mandalas, but I wanted to include stencils as one of the monthly lessons because you can do a lot of really pretty things. And the way that you interact with the stencil determines how the mandala turns out, and you can use one stencil a million different ways and get really pretty things. So I just wanted to kind of include this as a method of inspiration because there are so many different ways that you can make beautiful mandala stones. I am being way too picky about cleaning this up. Mandalas are very forgiving, and we've got more layers to put on here, so I really should not even be too worried about this. Because it's darn near perfect. All right. So that is the background layer. As far as colors, I'll just go over colors one time. The colors in the box this month, we had Laure, which is a light sagey green. We have Almondine, which is just like an off-white. We've got Blue Haven, which is a light blue. And then we've got Coral Shell and Coral Blush, which are our two coral colors. All right, so I'm going to start off with a 6mm tool and Blue Haven. And this is going to be our center dot. Then I'm going to get my 3mm tool, and we're going to use Coral Shell, which is the lighter color, the lighter coral, and we're doing 8 dots around that center. So I'm going to line up, you can see I've got some petals here. I'm going to line up one of these petals right at the top, and then I know where I'm going to put these dots. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. I'm just going to make these slightly larger since I had a few that were a little more paint than the others. All right, so 8 dots right around that center. That was my 3mm tool in Coral Shell. I'm going to grab my 1.5mm tool and Laurel, which is the sage green, and I am going to walk the dots. Now we're going to do that on these petals coming out from the center. So I've got 1.5mm Laurel, 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7. So we're going to walk the dots out from those petals. One of the tricks you can do when you're using a stencil is by dotting where the stencil meets the background. Helps eliminate that stencil look. So we don't want it to look like, you know, we just quickly stenciled something on there and that's our project, right? We want to elaborate on it and make it our own. But by eliminating some of these stencil edges, it really helps get rid of that stencil look. All right, so that was 1.5mm and Laurel. We walked the dots. All right, next we are going to work on these pieces right here. I'm going to use my 1.5mm tool and Blue Haven, which is my bright blue, and we're going to create a swipe right down the center of this other petal. So I'm going to dot once, and then I'm going to dot and slowly pull inward. Might even need to do 3 of those. There we go. So right where that little notch is, I'm going to dot. And I'm not quite getting a long enough line, so I am going to add more paint and then pull again. Dot. We want nice long swipes. So we end up with 8 of those. And then on the side of each of these petals that we just did, we're going to grab Almondine and we're going to pull onto the sides. So we're going to have a swoop on each side. So I'm going to dot and swoop, dot and swoop. The almond color is a little difficult to see, but it's on there and I think it looks good after adding those swoops. We're going to continue using that almondine color. I'm going to grab my 6mm tool. And what we're going to look for is these triangles. I am going to add a dot in between the triangle and that blue swipe. So a 6mm almondine dot. And we end up with 8 of those. And I'm going to continue using the same tool, 6mm, and the same color. And we're going to add an almondine dot at the tip of these petals here. And I'm going to, again, kind of half overlap the edge of the petal. So half is on the petal, half is off the petal. Neat. Next, I'm going to grab my 4mm tool, and you're going to need your 1.5mm tool as well to pull this into a little tadpole. So what I'm going to do now is inside of each of these petals, we're going to use Laurel. I'm going to create 2 dots on each side of this petal here. So up towards the top, we've got 2 dots, and then I'm going to pull this dot around the inside of that petal. So 4mm tool. And then we pull. And those are our little tadpoles. Fix that one. I'm not happy with how I placed those dots. Sorry, I try not to be too hard on myself, but when they're really uneven, it bugs me. Struggling with keeping these even today. On the struggle bus. There we go. All right, so you finished the tadpoles all the way around. And we did those with our 4mm tool and Laurel, and then pulled those into little tadpoles around that opening in the stencil. Next, we're going to use our 3mm tool and Blue Haven, and we are going to walk the dots. So again, I'm going to straddle the line here, the edge of that petal, and I'm going to walk the dots around that petal. So this is our 3mm tool and Blue Haven. Something, I had like a piece of paint stuck on the end of that tool, so I'm gonna have to come back and fix these. Just made some really chunky dots. That's okay. Almost anything can be fixed. So we walked the dots with Blue Haven. Right, then we're gonna get Coral Shell, which is the lighter coral color, and our 4mm tool. And I am gonna add dots at the bottom of each of these petals. So this is the lighter of the corals, 4mm dot at the bottom of the petal. We're going to continue using that tool, 4mm and Coral Shell. And I'm going to find this triangle again. And then we had a dot below it. Now we're going to have a dot above it in the Coral Shell. So all together, we added 16 coral shell dots. I am going to grab my 1mm tool. We're going to add a triple dot inside this triangle. So I need to dip and dot for each dot so that they are the same size, but we're going to add 1, 2, 3. So inside that triangle, we add 3 dots. 2, 3. After that, we're going to switch to 1.5 millimeters and our Laurel paint. And we are going to walk the dots. And I'm just going to add 3 little dots on each side of the triangle. So I'm going to dip and dot, 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 and then dip and dot, dot, dot. And so it fits right on each side of that little triangle. Okay, working outwards. Next, we're going to start working on these outer petals that look like flames. I'm going to grab my 3 millimeter tool and we are going to add laurel dots right in the center. I need to adjust a little bit here. Size feels just a little different, so I'm just going to go around and even them up. And I'm going to switch to my 1.5 millimeter tool. I'm going to continue working in Laurel. And we are going to add a long swipe on each side where this edge meets. We're going to swipe those down, and you may have to pull more than once to get that big long swipe, and that's okay. really feel like the edge petals of this stencil look a lot like flames. This would be a really fun stencil design to do with warm colors like reds, oranges, and yellows. Right, next we're going to continue with our 1.5 mm tool, and we're going to add some swipes. So we've got our triangle here, little triangle, and our dot, and in between the dot we've got some space. So we're going to use our Laurel paint and our 1mm tool, and we are going to add a swipe and a swipe. All right, next we're going to add some swipes on these flame petals here. I'm going to start with 3mm and the Blue Haven. And down here at these bottom pieces of the flame, I'm just going to swipe inward, one on each side. And we're just going to work up the side of this petal. So I'm going to switch to 1.5mm using the same color blue. And I'm going to add some swoops on that next part of the petal. And then finally, I am going to add a swoop, 2 swoops at the top with my 1mm tool and Blue Haven. Right, next I'm going to grab my 4mm tool and Laurel Green, and up at the top of the petal we've been working on, I am going to add a Laurel dot, 4mm. Next, I'm going to grab my 8mm tool and Laurel again. And this time I am going to go in the black space, or the blank space in between those two petals. And I'm going to add a dot. So there are 8 of those in Laurel. I've got a few bumps and scratches I'm going to fix up here with my background color, so don't mind me making a mess here. Lots of splatter tonight. I've been messy. Luckily, mandalas are pretty forgiving. We're coming in the home stretch here. Around these dots that we just added on there, we're going to create petals around those. And the first one is going to be with our Blue Haven. I'm going to use 1.5mm for my center dot, which is for me, it's my small tool on the large end. So I'm going to add a center dot and 1.5mm. Once I have my center dot, I'm going to switch to the 1mm side. I'm going to walk the dots down each side. I can fit 6 on each side, so I am going to slowly walk 6 on each side. All right, next we're going to switch to our 3mm tool and Almondine. And we're going to create a set of triple dots at the top of this, and it's going to turn into the top of the petal. So I'm going to do my center dot, and then 2 right under it in the shape of a triangle. That's our crown there. And then when we're done with those all the way around, we're going to walk the dots on each side. But I'm going to create this crown first. Then we're going to walk the dots on each side. You can either use your 1.5mm tool or your 2.5mm tool. I feel like On my sample, I used 1.5 millimeters. I think this time I'm going to switch to the 2.5. Use whatever you think is best. If you'd rather have delicate dots on the side, go ahead and do that. I think I want mine to be a little chunkier. So I'm going to switch to the 2.5 millimeter. But there's no right or wrong. We've got plenty of room here. So I'm just going to walk the dots on the side. So you can walk with whichever tool you would like. Once you finish that, that is it for the base of the design. And then the next step is just top dot. So please feel free to top dot however you would like. I'm going to change up the way I did my top dots. You can look at the sample if you want to keep true to the original. I'm going to add some of my coral blush as top dot. So here in the center, I'm going to use a 3mm tool and coral blush, which is the darker color, the stencil color. I'm going to add a center dot. I feel like this is a pretty busy pattern, so it's okay without top dots. I'm going to use 3mm and Blue Haven, and in the almond dots next to the triangle, I'm going to add a blue dot. And we've got these petals here in the middle. On my sample up at the top, I added laurel. I think today I'm going to add the stencil color, my coral blush. And I use 2.5 millimeters. You could use 2.5 or 3. I think my tools are in need of a good clean because my styluses are getting kind of clumpy, which is totally my fault because I'm really bad about cleaning them. We've got a coral shell dot in between these flamey petals right here. On my sample, I added a Blue Haven dot, so I am going to do that again today. 1.5 or 2.5 will fit on there. I'm using 2.5. At the edges of these flame petals on my sample, I added Blue Haven. Today, I feel like I need a little more pop, so I'm going to add coral shell. I'm going to add a 2.5 millimeter coral shell, which is the lighter of the corals. And then lastly, we have these petals, and inside the petal, we've got that laurel dot. I'm going to use my 4 millimeter tool and coral shell, just what I did on the sample. Now, the rest of my dots were really dry. These are not quite as dry, but I'm going to give it a go. So inside this petal is coral shell, 4 millimeters. So that's how I top dotted. I'm going to let this sit for about 45 minutes and dry completely. And then I'm going to add some shimmer on top just to see how that looks. On the sample, you can kind of see it just gives it a little bit of blue sheen. I did it before the pattern on the sample. Today I'm going to do it after the dotting, and I'm going to have the whole thing have the sheen and shimmer on it. Shimmer is a top coat, it is a glaze, so if you use this, you don't have to glaze on top. So I would love to see your versions. Zoom is not allowing there's been a setting change. Zoom is not allowing me to see anybody's pieces, so please share in the group, share in the share space. I will share mine. And for those of you who are on the call, or I guess it'll show on the recording too, but here is a little sneak peek of some of what we're doing next month. So a little sneak peek of that there. And that's all she wrote, guys. I will see you next time. Have a good night, everyone.